Pacific airfield stirred to life as the first rays of sunlight cut through the lingering morning mist, casting long golden streaks across the wet tarmac. Rows of Japanese aircraft sat in disciplined formation, their polished metal reflecting the humid dawn, almost as if the planes themselves were silently preparing for what lay ahead. Mechanics hurried between them, wrenches clanging, engines humming, and fuel hoses pumping the lifeblood of aviation into each warbird. The air was thick with the acrid scent of gasoline, sweat, and metal, a pungent reminder that every preparation carried the weight of life and death. Kamikaze pilots moved among the aircraft, each step measured, their boots squelching in puddles of rainwater and oil. Their faces were masks of resolve, but beneath the stoic exterior, faint tremors betrayed the understanding that these missions were final, irreversible, and terrifying. One pilot paused to check the gauges in his cockpit, the engine's vibration thrumming through his fingertips, while another adjusted his straps, the leather creaking under tense hands. Nearby, a squadron leader barked commands, voice sharp, eyes scanning the horizon for the first sign of enemy movement. Smoke from idling engines drifted lazily into the sky, blending with the ocean mist, while the rhythmic crashing of distant waves created a deceptive calm. The jungle at the edge of the airfield rustled with life, the subtle movements of unseen creatures amplifying the tension in the air. Every shadow seemed to quiver, every ripple in the puddles a silent herald of the chaos to come. As the pilots climbed into cockpits, the ground crews stepped back, forming lines along the tarmac, hands ready to signal the launch. Engines roared to life, a metallic symphony echoing across the island, and the airfield transformed from a scene of preparation into the very edge of a looming storm. Far above, the sky held the first glimmers of movement, distant silhouettes of American ships and distant anti-aircraft positions, hinting at the resistance that awaited these men. The tension was almost tangible, a coiled spring ready to snap, connecting the meticulous calm of the airfield with the imminent fury that would erupt just minutes later. And as the first engines began to taxi forward, a quiet understanding passed among the pilots and crew alike. What they were about to face was beyond training, beyond expectation, and it would test both their courage and the limits of their machines. This fragile balance of calm and impending chaos naturally leads into the next segment, the Kamikaze Squadron ready, as the pilots, now in their cockpits, prepare to leave the safety of the airfield for the deadly skies. Unaware of the lethal 40mm Bofors anti-aircraft guns waiting to greet them. The hum of engines rose steadily as the kamikaze pilots settled into their cockpits, each surrounded by the intricate maze of gauges, levers, and dials. The metal of the aircraft was cool under their gloves, yet the tension in their muscles radiated a heat that no tropical sun could match. A squadron of planes lined up on the runway, their propellers slicing through the morning mist, ready to lift the deadly men into the sky. The pilots, eyes flicked from horizon to instruments, each silently reciting the mission ahead. A path paved with certainty of death and perhaps fleeting glory. Below, ground crew members signaled with flags and hand gestures, their faces taut with a mixture of pride and fear. Each movement, each wave of a flag was amplified by the knowledge that any mistake here could end in catastrophe before the mission even began. The air was thick with fuel vapor and anticipation, a metallic tang cutting through the humid morning air. In unison, the pilots felt the subtle vibration of life from their planes. As engines surged, a powerful heartbeat that mirrored their own. Beyond the airfield, the calm blue of the Pacific stretched deceptively far, dotted with American ships bristling with unseen defenses. High above, clouds drifted lazily, masking the deadly alert of hidden anti-aircraft batteries, including the formidable 40mm Bofors that would soon redefine terror for these men. The pilots adjusted their helmets, secured their straps, and ran mental checklists, unaware that what they considered routine airfield preparation would soon collide with a firepower that was as swift as it was unforgiving. The tension between the pilots and the unseen threat was almost tangible, an invisible line drawn between life and the certainty of death. Some glanced at their comrades, exchanging nods of mutual understanding, silent camaraderie, forged in the shadow of impending doom. The first plane in the formation rolled forward, tires screeching against the wet runway, while the rest followed in a measured, deliberate sequence. The hum of engines now became a roar, blending with the distant cries of seabirds, and the airfield seemed to hold its breath in anticipation. As the squadron lifted off, their shadows stretching across the runway, the camera would follow the ascent from close cockpit shots to wide aerial views, emphasizing both the daring of the pilots and the deadly environment that awaited them. The subtle rhythm of propellers against the Pacific breeze contrasted sharply with the looming threat of anti-aircraft fire, setting the stage for the next moment. The 40mm Bofors guns, ready, primed, and waiting, their crews tense, eyes locked on the approaching skybound intruders, ready to unleash devastation that no kamikaze pilot could have anticipated. Atop a small ridge overlooking the Pacific airfield, the 40mm Bofors anti-aircraft guns gleamed in the morning sun, their steel barrels polished and ready, each meticulously maintained by crews who had faced countless waves of incoming aircraft. The men crouched behind sandbags and camouflaged positions, sweat dripping down their brows despite the gentle sea breeze. Their eyes scanned the horizon with trained precision, tracking the distant specks that would soon grow into the unmistakable silhouettes of Japanese planes. The rhythm of the crew was disciplined and silent, a choreography perfected over months of drills and real combat. One man adjusted the gun's elevation. Another rotated the turret with practiced ease, while a third monitored the sights, calculating distance, speed, and angle with a focus that left no room for error. Each crew member knew that in the next moments, the difference between life and death could be measured in seconds. The barrels of the Bofors shone ominously, promising a searing welcome to any intruder daring enough to breach their domain. The nearby jungle rustled faintly, a reminder that this lush Pacific terrain hid more than just the enemy. Camouflage and shadows could turn the tide of a skirmish in an instant, yet the men were ready, their hands steady, muscles coiled like springs, each heartbeat syncing with the thrum of anticipation. Ammunition belts clicked into place, the smell of oil as the first kamikaze planes appeared over the horizon. Tiny black dots against the morning sky. The crews leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Calculations were rapid, almost instinctive. Lead the target by a few meters, adjust for altitude, account for wind speed. Every second counted. The guns themselves seemed alive, poised to roar in unison, to tear through the air with the precision and ferocity that the pilots could not yet comprehend. From a distance, the Pacific seemed calm, waves gently lapping against the shore. But on this ridge, tension coiled like a spring, ready to snap. These men were the last line of defense, the invisible guardians of the fleet below. And when the first kamikaze dive came, the 40mm Bofors would erupt in controlled fury, sending fire streaking skyward, cutting swathes through the incoming squadron, and rewriting the expectations of every pilot who believed the skies would be theirs. This careful, tense preparation directly leads into the next moment. Segment 4, Kamikaze Dive initiated, where the deadly dance between pilot determination and anti-aircraft precision erupts into high-speed aerial chaos. From the distant horizon, black silhouettes of Japanese planes appeared, their engines humming a low, ominous tone that grew louder with every passing second. The kamikaze pilots, faces resolute behind goggles, gripped their controls tightly, hearts pounding with the deadly mix of fear and unwavering purpose. Each man carried the weight of a mission that demanded absolute sacrifice. The knowledge that the aircraft itself would become a weapon in the hands of a single, determined pilot. The first plane dropped low, banking sharply to line up its trajectory with the targeted airfield and ships below. The 40mm Bofors crews tensed, hands gripping triggers, eyes locking on to the incoming threat. Time seemed to stretch in those few precious seconds. The jungle-lined ridges and nearby waves offered no cover, nothing to hide the plane's approach. Every calculation mattered. Lead, elevation, wind correction. One misstep, one miscalculation, and the pilot could reach his target. As the dive accelerated, The aircraft's engine screamed over the roar of the sea and the distant calls of seabirds. Dirt and debris from nearby explosions kicked up in the wind, and the pilot's shadow stretched across the glinting tarmac below. For a fleeting moment, the calm morning was replaced by an almost surreal stillness, as if nature itself held its breath, watching the deadly ballet unfold. The Bofors crew reacted instantly, their movements fluid and precise. Guns swiveled, barrels tracking the dive with mechanical precision. The first round fired, tracer streaking through the air like a fiery needle. The pilot's plane wobbled slightly, the first taste of resistance breaking the serene illusion of control. Another burst, and smoke curled from the engine. The Kamikaze instinctively adjusted, trying to maintain speed and accuracy while dodging the hail of high-velocity shells. The intensity of the moment was palpable. Each gunner's eyes reflected both fear and determination, knowing that their skill, reflexes, and coordination could save countless lives below. The contrast between the pilot's suicidal resolve and the gunner's desperate defense created a high-stakes tension that electrified the air. The planes plunged faster. The Bofors guns unleashed volley after volley, and the sky seemed alive with fire, smoke, and the deafening cadence of war. This segment flows directly into Segment 5, First Hits on Kamikaze, where the first planes are struck, smoke trailing in fiery arcs, and the devastating effect of the Bofors anti-aircraft guns becomes unmistakably clear. The first Kamikaze plane shuddered violently under a barrage of tracer rounds from the 40mm Bofors guns. Sparks erupted along its fuselage, and smoke trailed in a twisting plume as the pilots struggled to maintain control. The roar of the anti-aircraft fire echoed across the airfield, mingling with the wind and distant crash of waves, creating a chaotic symphony of destruction. Each shell that struck punctuated the tension, a stark reminder that the pilot's lethal determination met an equally relentless defense. The Bofors crews worked like clockwork, coordinating in perfect synchrony. One gunner tracked the aircraft's descent, while another adjusted fire based on speed, altitude, and wind. The shells tore through the air with precision, the deafening explosions scattering plumes of smoke and debris. The initial calm of the morning now seemed distant, replaced by the frantic energy of life and death calculation. On the ground, officers and soldiers watched with wide-eyed intensity. They understood the stakes. Every successful hit saved men, material, and territory from the destructive power of a determined kamikaze strike. Yet even as the first planes were hit, others swooped closer, their engines screaming, determination unbroken. The Bofors crews had to anticipate every move, predicting evasive maneuvers while maintaining relentless pressure. In the sky, the contrast was stark. The Japanese pilots, faces tight with concentration behind their goggles, were suddenly confronted with the limits of their mission. Their aircraft, built for speed and aggression, now danced under the punishing hail of anti-aircraft fire. Some wobbled, smoke trailing, forcing last-second corrections. Others were shredded mid-air, fragments scattering like deadly confetti across the blue backdrop of the Pacific sky. This first wave of destruction sent a psychological shock through the remaining Kamikaze Squadrons. The pilots realized, perhaps for the first time, that their expectation of uncontested attacks was brutally misplaced. Yet their resolve did not falter entirely. The desperation and determination in their eyes intensified as they pressed forward. This segment naturally transitions into Segment 6, Kamikaze Pilots Adjust and Fight, where the surviving planes attempt evasive maneuvers, showing both their audacity and the overwhelming effectiveness of the Bofors anti-aircraft guns. The surviving kamikaze planes twisted and banked sharply, attempting last-ditch evasive maneuvers as the 40mm Bofors shells streaked toward them like deadly meteors. Sweat glistened on the pilots' foreheads, their knuckles white against the controls. Every pull of the stick and twist of the throttle was a desperate calculation. Too slow, and the plane would be shredded. Too fast, and it might stall before reaching its target. The Pacific sky, once serene and infinite, had become a gauntlet of precision firepower and life-or-death stakes. From below, the Bofors crews tracked every movement, adjusting aim with remarkable speed and accuracy. The rhythm was mechanical, yet almost instinctive. Eyes, ears, and reflexes all tuned to the deadly dance above. The sound of the guns was deafening, a constant barrage that rattled the airfield and vibrated the tarmac underfoot. Clouds of smoke and flashes of fire marked each hit, leaving pilots struggling to maintain altitude as fragments tore through their wings and fuselage. Yet the kamikaze pilots refused to retreat. They knew that hesitation would cost not only their mission, but their lives. And so they pressed forward, weaving through the sky like desperate ghosts. The tension was palpable. The sight of one plane wreathed in smoke, spiraling uncontrollably toward the ocean, served as both warning and grim motivation to the others. On the ground, American officers and infantry held their breaths, eyes darting from radar readings to the horizon. They could see the panic beginning to ripple through the enemy formations. Pilots who had been confident minutes before were now visibly shaken, their movements erratic, their resolve tested. The Bofors guns had shifted the psychological balance of the engagement, transforming what was expected to be a terrifying offensive into a calculated and lethal trap for the Kamikaze Squadron. The chaos in the sky foreshadowed the inevitable outcome. Even the most skilled pilots could not match the combination of preparation, firepower, and tactical coordination of the anti-aircraft defenses. Each evasive maneuver was met with another calculated burst of shells, and slowly, the squadron's momentum began to crumble. The sky above the Pacific airfield had transformed into a chaotic canvas of smoke, fire, and falling debris. Kamikaze planes, once poised for their deadly dives, now tumbled in spirals, wings shredded, engines spitting flames, leaving trails of black smoke behind. The 40mm Bofors guns fired relentlessly, each round finding its mark with terrifying accuracy. The bursts of metal and fire created a rhythmic, almost surreal spectacle, a deadly ballet in the morning light. Pilots struggled to regain control, twisting frantically, but the damage was often too severe. Some planes disintegrated mid-air, fragments scattering like deadly hail over the ocean below, while others plummeted toward the waves in slow-motion descents, their doomed trajectories leaving plumes of smoke as ominous signatures of failure. The sky was no longer a theater of attack. It had become a graveyard for the brave but overmatched aviators. Below, the Bofors crews remained steadfast, their faces set with grim determination. Hands gripping the controls, eyes trained on each incoming target. They anticipated movements, adjusted angles, and fired again. Each explosion was met with a mixture of awe and relief. Every plane downed was one less threat to the fleet and the troops they protected. The anti-aircraft guns had not only destroyed machines, but shattered the morale of the remaining pilots, who now approached with visible hesitation. Their confidence eroded. The ocean glistened under the rising sun, yet its reflection was interrupted by the silhouettes of spiraling aircraft, burning debris, and parachutes of pilots who had bailed out too late. The air was thick with smoke, the acrid smell of aviation fuel, and the echoing booms of the Bofors fire. Even at a distance, the devastation was clear. What was expected to be a swift and terrifying kamikaze attack had been transformed into a devastating lesson in the lethal precision of well-prepared defenses. As the sun climbed higher over the Pacific, the air above the fleet was no longer a simple theater of warfare. It had become a crucible of fear. Japanese kamikaze pilots, once resolute and steely-eyed, now faltered in mid-flight. Their once confident dives slowed, their formations breaking apart under the unrelenting fire of the 40mm Bofors guns. Every flash from the guns, every explosion that tore through the sky, resonated like a thunderclap in their ears, instilling a growing sense of vulnerability that was impossible to ignore. Inside cockpits, hands trembled slightly over throttles and controls, eyes darting nervously from horizon to horizon. Some pilots tried to maintain the illusion of composure, but the once unshakable determination began to crack. Whispers of doubt, fear, and survival instinct surged within them, a dangerous adversary they had never anticipated. Their focus on the mission was replaced by calculations of escape, evasive maneuvers, and hesitation, which only made them easier targets for the precise, rapid-firing Bofors crews below. The psychological collapse was evident even before contact. Formations that had seemed disciplined and deadly were now jagged, planes straying from their flight paths, and dive angles erratic. The unshakable aura of the kamikaze legend, fearless pilots willing to sacrifice themselves for honor, was being systematically dismantled by disciplined, mechanical, and deadly American anti-aircraft fire. Below, observers on the ships and in command posts noted the change in the skies. The once terrifying threat of mass kamikaze attacks had been reduced to isolated, erratic strikes. Crew members whispered among themselves, realizing that the Bofors guns were not just tools of destruction. They were instruments of psychological warfare, weaponizing fear and doubt with lethal efficiency. The sky above the Pacific Fleet had transformed into a deadly tage of crisscrossing tracer lines and bursting shells. The 40mm Bofors anti-aircraft guns roared in unison, their barrels flashing as they tracked every incoming kamikaze plane with relentless precision. Each shot created a streak of fire and smoke, a deadly warning that no pilot could ignore. The rhythmic pounding of gunfire echoed across the water, a mechanical heartbeat of destruction that contrasted sharply with the chaos it wrought above. American gunners moved with fluid, practiced coordination, eyes narrowed behind dust-smeared goggles, hands adjusting sights and calculating angles, every movement honed by countless hours of training. The Bofors barrels shivered under the strain of rapid firing, but crews barely noticed, focused entirely on keeping their lines of fire unbroken, predicting the kamikazes' maneuvers and anticipating their fatal dives. From the Japanese perspective, the sky was a maze of lethal arcs. Pilots twisted and banked desperately, trying to evade the explosive hail. But the disciplined and concentrated American fire allowed almost no margin for error. Some planes were shredded mid-dive, their wings shearing under the impact of perfectly timed 40mm rounds. Others spiraled away, engines smoking, leaving behind trails of black smoke as grim warnings to those still pressing forward. The intensity of the fire was almost overwhelming, both visually and psychologically. Each burst tore through the tension, leaving pilots acutely aware of the razor-thin line between mission and death. The ocean beneath reflected flashes of destruction, and the distant horizon seemed hazy with smoke, tracer trails, and fragments of doomed aircraft. The battlefield had become a deadly dance, choreographed by the meticulous timing and discipline of the anti-aircraft crews. The once tight formations of kamikaze planes now appeared fractured, scattered by the relentless storm of 40mm Bofors fire. Pilots struggled to maintain their planned dive paths, weaving frantically to avoid the lethal arcs of exploding shells. Smoke and fire streaked across the sky, leaving trails of destruction in the wake of planes torn apart mid-flight. What had started as a disciplined, menacing wave of attacks was now a chaotic scramble for survival. From above, the fleet and its gunners looked almost serene in comparison, the air above boiling with motion, but the deck steady, organized, and efficient. Crew members called out targets, swapped positions seamlessly, and reloaded the Bofors guns with practiced speed. Every burst of fire had an immediate effect, and the pilots' inability to stick to formation made them easy targets for the next salvo. The psychological impact on the Japanese pilots was palpable. Fear replaced the initial resolve. Their confidence shattered as the deadly rhythm of the Bofors fire forced errors in judgment and evasive maneuvers that were too late. Some pilots attempted desperate dives from higher altitudes. Others veered off course entirely, and a few even aborted their runs, climbing away to escape the deadly hail. The ocean below swallowed wreckage and fuel in a series of violent splashes, emphasizing the fatal consequences of every miscalculation. Meanwhile, American spotters and radar operators tracked the disarray, their reports feeding into the gunners' precise targeting. It was a calculated symphony of defense, each action feeding the next, each reaction predictable yet devastating. The once feared kamikaze threat was systematically unraveling before disciplined firepower, a testament to the deadly efficiency of well-trained anti-aircraft crews. A handful of kamikaze planes that survived the initial storm of 40mm Bofors fire now found themselves in a desperate race against time and gravity. Pilots twisted their aircraft in sharp, daring maneuvers, attempting to evade tracer rounds and exploding shells that shredded the sky around them. Smoke trailed from damaged engines, sparks flew from grazed fuselages, and fuel leaks ignited small, fiery plumes that followed the planes like ominous comets. Every second stretched into eternity as gunners recalculated targets mid-burst, their eyes tracking these lone threats with unwavering focus. The pilots' faces, visible through tiny cockpits, reflected a mixture of determination, panic, and grim acceptance. Each dive was a calculated gamble, too slow, and they risked being torn apart by anti-aircraft fire. Too aggressive, and misjudging altitude could send them plunging into the ocean, harmlessly, before reaching the fleet. From the deck of the defending ships, the scene was a tense, almost surreal ballet of survival and destruction. Explosions bloomed like flowers in the sky as the Bofors guns unleashed their precise, deadly rhythm. Smoke and debris hung suspended momentarily before falling into the sea below, each splash a stark reminder of what awaited those who miscalculated. Amid the chaos, some kamikaze pilots skirted the edge of destruction, narrowly avoiding shells by inches. Yet every near miss was a fragile victory. The psychological strain was evident. Pilots were pushed to the limits of human endurance and focus, every heartbeat a countdown to either impact or destruction. The destructive dance was relentless, and the futility of these missions became increasingly clear with each evasive maneuver that led them further from their intended targets. From a slightly elevated vantage point on the deck, the American 40mm Bofors crews worked with precision and silent discipline. Officers, with binoculars and rangefinders, scanned the horizon, tracking the erratic dives of the kamikaze planes. Clipboards and maps were covered in chalk marks and plotted vectors, illustrating predicted flight paths of each incoming threat. Every movement was choreographed. Every operator knew their role, from loading shells into the gun's breech to adjusting elevation and lead based on calculated speed and distance. The crew's eyes moved in unison, a single, fluid entity of trained efficiency. When one gunner locked on a target, another adjusted for crosswind and altitude, while a third called out corrections with a calm, commanding voice. Smoke from spent shells drifted across the deck, mingling with the salty ocean spray, yet no one broke their rhythm. Sweat glistened on tense foreheads, hands moving instinctively as if guided by muscle memory honed over countless drills. Amid the chaos of whistling shells and roaring aircraft engines, there was a quiet satisfaction in the rhythm of coordinated action. Each detonation in the sky marked a successful engagement, a validation of countless hours of preparation. Even as debris rained down from destroyed kamikaze planes, the crews remained composed, their minds focused entirely on the next target. The officers occasionally leaned over to confer, pointing at plotted vectors and adjusting firing arcs, demonstrating the combination of human judgment and mechanical precision. The effectiveness of the 40mm Bofors guns wasn't just in raw firepower. It was in teamwork, observation, and unyielding coordination. These synchronized efforts turned the tide against the kamikaze threat, ensuring that the skies above the fleet were not a chaotic battlefield, but a controlled zone where every threat was met with calculated force. The Pacific skies had quieted, leaving only the distant roar of waves against the coral reefs and the soft clatter of spent shell casings on the deck. Smoke and debris from the decimated kamikaze planes lingered like ghostly reminders of the chaos just endured. Officers and crews stood together, wiping sweat and salt from their brows, their eyes scanning the horizon as if to ensure no threat remained. Maps, diagrams, and tactical overlays covered tables in the command tent, annotated with flight paths, engagement ranges, and shell effectiveness. Charts displayed the staggering success rates of the 40mm Bofors guns. Dozens of enemy aircraft intercepted before reaching their targets, pilots forced to abort their missions, and entire squadrons effectively neutralized. The analysis highlighted not only the technical superiority of the Bofors, but also the critical role of disciplined observation, rapid response, and coordinated firing. The psychological impact on the Japanese pilots was undeniable. Where once they believed in the inevitability of their attacks, now hesitation crept into their dives. Each pilot approaching the fleet faced a wall of precise, unrelenting fire, a tangible reminder that their aircraft alone were insufficient against well-prepared defenses. Conversely, The American crews, emboldened by their successful engagements, understood the value of preparation, teamwork, and technology combined to tip the scales in their favor. Sunlight filtered through the remaining smoke, illuminating the calculated aftermath. Scattered debris, damaged but repaired equipment, and determined crews, already preparing for the next possible threat. Overhead, the horizon stretched wide and calm, the chaos of the battle now transformed into lessons learned and strategies refined. In essence, the 40mm Bofors guns had not only defended the fleet, they had reshaped expectations, turned fear into control, and demonstrated that a combination of firepower, training, and coordination could decisively dominate even the most determined aerial attacks. The lessons of this engagement would echo throughout the Pacific Campaign, influencing tactics, morale, and the very psychology of aerial warfare for both sides.